Hello. Time for another Pixar movie. Pretty much most Fridays are a Pixar movie at the moment, so yeah. Um, yeah. So this is actually going to be me talking about Monsters University, which came out in 2013. And this is, of course, the prequel to Monsters Inc., represented back here via shirt. Um, it's been a little while since I watched the movie. I still remembered like the plot of the movie and everything, Mike and Sully and, the majority of the plot that happens, but it's just like, yeah, it's still fun to like rewatch these movies anyway. It's like, as I said, it's just like Cars 2 is like my least favorite one, but I still am perfectly fine with watching it. I would say Monsters University is a bit above Cars 2, but I've never actually done a ranking of all of the Pixar movies. Maybe that'll be something that I do along with like a ranking of like all of the Disney movies at some point in time. That might just be a video that I save for later. So, Monsters University. So of course, the movie starts with a 6-year-old Mike Wazowski, of course, on this field trip with his class and everything. And they're going to Monsters Inc. to have like a tour of the facility and everything. And of course, Mike is unfortunately one of these, is kind of the kid that, gets left behind a lot. Nobody wants to be his partner when they have to buddy up and everything like that. People don't really like being around him, or he's just not that impressive of a monster in their opinions. He's very underwhelming. And, so we see a lot of that. We see, he gets like paired up with the teacher as his buddy as opposed to like one of the other students and everything. They go on the tour of, Monsters Inc. and everything. And, we go see and we see the scare floor and, all of the kids are like, ready to go and see like what's going to happen on the scare floor. But of course, they're not allowed on the scare floor. And of course, stated human children are toxic. But of course, since this is a prequel, of course, nothing's happened with Boo. This is how Mike and Sully met and everything. And of course, what ends up happening is, all the scares of that time frame come out, and they do like the scares walk into the hall and everything. And one of them, Frank McKay. And the thing that I really like that they show with Monsters Inc., and they show this in the first one too, and like they show this in Monsters University, is that, it's the monsters themselves. So like we see this with Sully and such, is the monsters themselves are usually just pretty, they're pretty like us a lot. They're very nice. Frank McKay stops and like talks to the students and everything. And, it was like, he's a scarer and like, talks to them a little bit and it's like very nice to them and everything, welcomes them to, Monsters Inc. and everything. And, he's like, well, we, our job is, gather energy from the human world by, gathering up scream energy. And then, it gets, capsuled here and then it's, used to, power, the monster world, Monstropolis and the other areas. And I do like that they show that. I like that they show that it's their job, but it's not something, it's like, yeah, technically they enjoy doing it because it's their job, but we also just kind of see them be a little bit more, relaxed and everything, and I do like that. We see that later on in the movie anyway, and we saw that in Monsters Inc. several times as well, because Sully even states when he's like talking to Boo, when she's like, when she's like, staying in his room and everything because she's scared of the closet because she thinks Randall's going to come out of the closet, he's like, no, I'm not going to scare you right now. I'm off duty and everything. So it's just like, there's this, difference there in their minds. It's, they need to scare the people, the kids in the human world to get their scream energy. But there's the whole thing of, it's what we're supposed to do. But, if it's not something that we're supposed to do, or it's not something that we're working towards as a career, probably wouldn't do it that much. But of course, what ends up happening is, McKay goes in and Mikey, unfortunately couldn't like see very well over everyone, and he ends up, sneaking into the scare floor, and Frank McKay goes into his door, and Mikey follows him in, and ends up watching McKay scare this child. And, you know, Mikey was like very quiet and everything while he was in there. And like he sees like McKay has to like hide at some point in time because like the parents show up in the room and then like they leave. And then like, you know, he ends up, you know, scaring the child and getting the scream energy and everything and then getting out of the room. And of course, when he comes out, we have like all the people ready to like jump into the room to see like if something happened or whatever, if like McKay or if like, you know, if Mike got hurt or something like that. But like Mike just comes out, he's just got this like wide eye look on his face, and he's, you know, his teacher's like, well, what do you have to say for yourself? And he's just like, how do I become a scarer? And like McKay is just like looking at him and he's just like, I didn't even know that you were in there. And he's like impressed with the fact that like Mike was able to get into the room, like not notice, you know, McKay didn't notice that he was in there at all. And he, you know, he takes off his hat and like McKay is like, you know, I went to Monsters University when I was, you know, when I went to college and everything, because they're like the best place to, you know, learn how to scare. There's also like Fear Tech, I think is the other one. But he, you know, he gives Mike his hat, and it's just like, you know, you're going to be a scarer one day. You know, he's just like, he has confidence in him and he gives in his old hat. And of course we, we get kind of the sequence of like, you know, the title sequence and everything of like, you know, Mike working very, very hard to, you know, study everything he can about becoming a scarer and everything. And one moment there's a bug on my wall. The bug is dead now. And, you know, we see Mike, you know, he's just like working really, really hard, you know, straight A's on tests and everything, and, you know, applying for Monsters University so he can go there and, you know, learn to be a scarer and everything. And we got to like 12 years later when he graduates and he goes and he gets to Monsters University. So it's his first day. He goes through, you know, orientation and, you know, tour and like all this other stuff. So we get to see around the building and everything. And I like how they have like different sections of the school because, you know, there's of course the cafeteria and there's the dorms and there's, you know, we see like all these different clubs and everything like what you're going to see at a normal college. And then of course there's the different areas of study in the college. There's one course that like works on how, you know, they're the ones that like make the doors that the scarers then use for them to go through at, you know, Monsters Incorporated. You know, it's like they're learning how to make the doors, and that would actually be a very interesting process of like, so how does this work? That would be a very, you know, a nice thing to find out a little bit more, because it's just like, well, they have a door on this side and it connects to the door of the human world, so obviously the doors have to be the same. But, you know, we kind of see them testing this and everything in throughout the course of the movie, and it's a very interesting, you know, concept. And of course, you know, we find out later there's another area, of course, you know, they're the capsule, you know, ones that make the Scream capsule manufacturers, and I'm just like, God, no. And then, of course, there's the Scare School, you know, where all the scarers go for the scare program and everything. And what ends up happening is Mike ends up, you know, he goes and he gets like his, you know, his roommate, and it's just like, oh, your roommate's a scarer guy, you know, is a scarer too and everything. And it's like, oh, cool. And like, you know, if you haven't seen the movie before, of course, or if it's, you know, if you haven't like seen some of the previews to a degree, you kind of expect it to be that Sully is going to be his roommate, but it's not. It's Randy, or Randall Boggs. And of course, we kind of see this as like, I like how they put this in here because then like just adds more layers to like what happens in Monsters Inc. later on. You know, in the original movie for Monsters Inc., adding this in with like Randall being, you know, Mike's roommate, and like they start off on really good terms and everything. Like Mike is even the one that points out, you know, it's like for Randall, it's just like, you know, no, you're you know, going invisible or camouflaging or whatever is actually a really cool power and everything. You know, that could be really good for scaring and everything. And, you know, so it's like Randall, you know, it's just like him and Mike get off to a very good start as roommates. And of course, you know, Mike, or, you know, what ends up happening is, of course, you know, the next day is, of course, you know, the first day of class and everything. And Mike is, of course, in like, I don't remember what the exact name for it is, but it's like Scaring 101, and it's run by this guy that's called Professor Knight, and he kind of looks like a dinosaur and everything. Knight is in Knitght. I believe. And like he's a good teacher and everything, but like, you know, he's, you know, like talking to the students, you know, you have the scare final at the end of the semester, and if you don't pass that, then you're not going to be in the program. And then of course we are also introduced to my favorite new character in the movie is Dean Hardscrabble. And she is, of course, this you know, she's like this legendary scarer. She was, you know, she's specifically, I think she's like the dean of the whole school, but like specifically of the scare program. And, you know, she's very, very intimidating, and I love her design. She's got like these, you know, the way that her entrance is like these huge bat wings, and, you know, she's got like this centipede-ish type body, for like her lower half, and her top half is kind of like draconic and everything. And I just love her design. She's so cool looking. And yeah, no, I would be terrified of her if I ran into her. Yeah. But like she stated to be like this legendary scare. Like she probably worked at like Monsters Inc. at one point in time. Was like has like this scare record of like she has like this canned scream that is like it sits on a pedestal in the scaring room. That is like her record of like this, like the loudest or the longest or something like that of like the best scream ever captured came from her, as in like she scared that out of a child. Oh, I hear the dog. Rainy, come here. Come on, up on the bed. Puppy, we has puppy. You wanna help me talk? Wanna help in the video? Rainy, maybe, I don't know. Do I? Can I have this window? No. First of all, I can't have the window open while I'm recording because of noise, and B, it's much too hot outside to have the window open. Yeah, it's much too hot to have the window open right now, and like our air conditioner got busted or was a little bit busted earlier this late spring, but now it's, you know, we got it fixed, so we're fine. We got a brand new air conditioner, so that's very helpful. But you know, I just like Dean Hardscrabble, and she's like very intimidating, and she's like looking over like the scare students, and she's just like, you know, if any of you fail the final exam this semester, you know, then you're out of the scaring program and everything. She's just like very intimidating, and I just love her. I want to name a Pokemon after her, and the only thing that I can think of that would be appropriate to name after her, simply just because of the way that they're designed, would be a Scolipede, but I have not done that yet. Hi, Rainy. Rainy's like, hi. I'm gonna itch my ear. Are you okay? Silly puppy. But of course, you know, after she leaves, then you know, Professor Knight is just like, you know, hey, you know, is like, tries to get like someone to answer a question, and Mike starts answering, and then in walks in Sully, you know, James P. Sullivan, and he just, you know, roars into the classroom and everything, and he actually ends up being, it's either Hardscrabble shows up first, or Mike, or Sully does. I don't remember exactly, but one of the two. And then Sully shows up, and he's just like, you know, he steals everybody's thunder, and he's like, oh, you're a Sullivan, as in like the son of like this, you know, the Sullivans that are like big scarers and everything. He's just like, yep, that's me. And, you know, he's like big man on campus. You know, he's a new freshman that's, you know, got like this legacy behind him and everything. And he's, you know, not even prepared for class and everything. And, you know, throughout the course of, you know, the next, you know, that night after the class is over and everything, Mike is of course very intent on studying and everything. And what ends up happening is, it's, you know, big, you know, pledge parties and, you know, parties at the, you know, at the different fraternities and sororities and everything. And, you know, Randall goes off to do those. He baked cupcakes. I'm like, okay, if Randall had stayed this way, that would have been fine. But he turns into a jerk later on through the movie, and then of course into, you know, the what we see in Monsters Inc. So it's like we get this either, we also get like a backstory for Randall, which I kind of like too. Not just Mike and Sully, but we get Randall, and we get like a few other bits here and there. There's a couple of other monsters that we see like in the background that also end up being like scarers along with Mike, or with Sully. But what ends up happening is, you know, Mike is trying to study, and then into his room ends up appearing this weird little like pig thing, and followed by Sully. And then Sully is just like, you know, oh, I stole the mascot from like our you know, Fear Tech or whatever, the, you know, the that are our rival school and everything. I stole their mascot because I'm going to use it as a way of like, you know, getting me credit to, you know, get, you know, pledged to, you know, Roar Omega Roar, you know, the biggest, you know, the best, you know, fraternity on campus. And what ends up happening is, of course, Mike and Sully do not get off to a very good start. They didn't get a good start earlier that day in the first day of class, and then they did not get into a good start just now with, like, Sully climbing into his room and causing problems. And then, of course, because the pig steals Mike's hat, Mike and Sully are, like, chasing after the hat. Mike to get his hat back, Sully to get the pig to get credit for it. And it's actually, of course, Mike that ends up getting the pig caught, and then, of course, Sully's the one that gets the credit for it, starting this rivalry between them. And then, of course, throughout the rest of the semester, we just see, like, this rivalry increase. Mike studies very, very hard and diligently and everything. And we see Randall studying with him. Mike getting all these, getting books at the library and everything, like, actually studying. And, him and Randall, like, going over their studying projects and everything. And then, of course, we just see Sully just kind of, like, goofing off, using his privilege and everything that he has as being a Sullivan, and, not doing a very good job at trying to learn how to be a scare. Like, Mike is showing improvement, Sully is not. We see this throughout the course of the semester. And then, of course, by the end of the semester, we have this, we have, like, the scare final and everything. And it's, it's the same setup that we see the Monsters training with, like, at the beginning of Monsters, Inc., where they have, like, the scare room and the fake child, and, like, the monster has to, like, go into the room and, like, scare the child. And then, they're graded on that. It's their scare final. And what ends up happening is, Dean Hardscrabble's there, and she's watching. And Sully has just, like, been enjoying, of course, getting to be a part of the fraternity and everything. And there's, like, I cannot remember the name of the guy that's the head of the fraternity for, like, Roar, Omega Roar. Why I can't remember his name, I don't know, because it's actually quite important to the film. Jonathan Worthington is the name of the guy that's like the head frat boy at Roar, Omega Roar and everything. Yeah, he's not that. He's also the big man on campus. He's like, all the best. Roar, Omega Roar has the best scares. So he's like telling Sully, if you don't pass, you're not in this the fraternity anymore. So you better pass. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is Mike and Sully end up getting into basically a fight in the room during class while the finals are going on. And they end up breaking the canister that has, Dean Hardscrabble's, the scream that she earned. And it ends up, breaking all the lights in the room when the scream goes off and, like, causing this huge amount of damage. And, she looks at Mike and Sully, and they end up getting, thrown out of the scaring course at the end of the semester because, they caused a lot of problems. And what ends up happening is she also, like, tries to test them initially. She tries to test Mike in regards to, like, gives him a scenario for, like, how to scare a child. And then she doesn't even let him try to, like, do it. And then she, like, tries to get Sully to do the same thing. But he fails as well. So it's just like Sully obviously didn't pay attention, but Mike, she doesn't see Mike having the potential to scare anyone. And what ends up happening is Mike then, of course, remembers about the scare games, which are these, extracurricular competition involving the different dorms or the different fraternities and sororities on campus. And what ends up happening is Mike ends up enrolling himself into a fraternity called Uzma Kappa. And him, along with the other fraternities, it's very, very small, little, it's like a brand new fraternity. They're literally okay, Uzma Kappa, yeah. And it's like a bunch of these misfit, students and everything. And Mike ends up, in front of, like, the student body when the scare games are supposed to start. He, like, confronts Hardscrabble, and he's just like, here's what's going to happen. If me and my team win the scare games, you let me back into the scare program. And she's like, if you win, I will let your entire team into the scare program. But if you lose, then you must, then he'll be kicked out of the school. Don't know if that will also apply to, like, the rest of his fraternity as well, or if it would just be Mike. I don't remember if we ever get that like clarification, but at the very least Mike would get kicked out, but they need one more member on the team. And that's when, you know, Sully steps up, and he's just like, he's trying to do it to save his own skin, obviously. And, you know, he's like, oh, well, if I can carry the team and everything. Like, he ends up joining. Mike does not like this, but he ends up joining. And, you know, we're then introduced to the rest of, you know, Uzma Kappa. There is, let's see, there's Art, as the purple guy. He's like a philosophy major. There is Terry and Terry, that are, you know, kind of, you know, the two heads on the one body and everything. There is, what is the name of the, what is it? Then there's Don Carlton, who's, of course, you know, he's like the older guy, that, you know, the guy that, you know, got downsized and he had to go back to college and everything. He was a salesman. And then, of course, there's Scott Squishy Squibbles, who is the like the youngest member of the fraternity, and he is this like just this little kind of looking squishy monster with like 5 eyes or whatever. And Mike and Sully, of course, learn that, you know, well, first of all, Mike and Sully have to be in the same room. They're, you know, dormed in the same bedroom now at the Uzma Kappa house. And what ends up happening is, of course, they end up learning that this is also, it's not actually fully a fraternity house. It's actually where Scott's, you know, it's actually his mom's house, and she's letting them, you know, be there and everything. And they try to do this like creepy initiation in the basement, and then she just like walks in and goes and does laundry, which is just funny. But of course, throughout the course of the scare games, the first one is there are these, because like each scare test is like a test to, you know, kind of like see your aptitude for scaring, and makes perfect sense. And it's like revealed that like Dean Hardscrabble is the one that like, you know, invented these games back when she was a student at the college and everything so many years ago. And she, you know, is like, you know, very interested in the games in and of itself, because it kind of lets the students prove what they can do a little bit more on display for the rest of the school. And what we see is the first task, or the first trial, is that it's a test to see about how good you are at like avoiding toxic things, because, you know, as it's stated, you know, children are toxic. You know, so it's like any of their toys are, of course, you know, toys or clothes or anything like that covered in their germs, so they're like very toxic things. And so it's like they have to be able to, you know, like a monster has to be able to, like, you know, get through the toxic area without getting hurt. And what ends up happening is it's shown that they actually use these, they look a lot like sea anemones type things, or not anemones, I don't remember what they're called, but like these really spiky sea creatures that have like poison and stuff all over them. And those are scattered throughout like this underground sewer area that like the teams have to like make their way through. And it's like their whole team has to make their way through, and the team that comes in last gets disqualified. So, of course, what ends up happening is all the different teams from the different sororities. There's Royal Omega Roar, there's, you know, Uzma Kappa, there's Jaws Theta Chi, there's Hiss, there's Pink, and I think there's like one other one that I just can't remember. But, you know, it's like they're all just like, you know, little like fun different, you know, sororities and fraternities that they have there, to show like all these different like scare students and everything. And they're, you know, they all start racing through, and like, you know, Mike and Sully are, of course, trying to compete with each other. And they, of course, get stung with the different, you know, poison things, and they, you know, start swelling up and everything. And as do like the rest of their team, as do a bunch of the other characters that are running through. Some of the other teams are better at working together than others. And of course, there's much more to the obstacle course than just, you know, getting through the toxic stuff. There's also ones where it's like they're hanging from the ceiling and swinging around, and like where they're being thrown at them by other students. And, you know, and this is all like in the dark, because of course children's rooms are in the dark all the time when you're sneaking in there to scare them. So, you know, we're going through all of that, and what ends up happening is Uzma Uzma does come in dead last. But because of the fact that it's revealed that one of the other fraternities were actually cheating, they use like this, protective gel to like prevent them from getting, affected by the, poison things. They're eliminated, but then, the rest, then, Uzma Kappa isn't allowed to stay at the games. And we cut to the next one. Let's see. Which one was it that happened first? Because I cannot remember if there's the party first or if then there's the library one first. But I think I'm going to do talk about the library first and then the party. So what ends up happening is their second task is Mike starts getting all of them a little bit more prepared, and he's like, okay, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to be the one that's in charge of this team. All of you just copy me. Sully, of course, is not up for this, but everybody else is just like, okay, I guess, this is what we're going to do. And what ends up happening is the second task is they have to sneak through the school library without getting caught by the librarian. And it's a version of capture the flag. And of course, when you're sneaking through a child's room, you have to be quiet because you don't want the parents to hear you, but you also don't want, you don't want the child to see you until you're ready to scare them. So what ends up happening is, the librarian is terrifying, by the way. She's just giant freaking slug-looking thing that has like tentacles. And she's, very, very large. And what ends up happening is the way that they end up actually getting to the end of their task or getting to the task finished is they actually end up using misdirection, because while Mike was trying to have them be quiet the entire way through, what ends up happening is they're kind of about to all get caught, and they all end up actually distracting the librarian so she can't focus on any one of them. And while they're doing the misdirection ploy of all of them getting, not getting caught, but like distracting the librarian so they can all then, get through the library. Scott Squishy ends up actually like getting the flag, and they're allowed to continue because they were not the last ones. And one of the other teams got caught by the librarian. Because it's like, as long as, it's like you don't have to be quiet necessarily to win the challenge. You just have to not get caught. That's the rules. You just can't get caught. And then there ends up being a fraternity party held at Roar Omega Roar that they end up getting invited to. And, they kind of think that they're having fun and everything. And Mike ends up, he sees the trophy in there for the past scare games that have all been won by all these other scarers from Roar Omega Roar and everything. And he's just because he just wants to achieve this, because he's always been looked down upon his whole life, overlooked and everything. And what ends up happening is, of course, it ends up being, being a big prank played on Uzma Kappa in order to humiliate them. And what ends up happening is, in the middle of the party, they have Uzma Kappa in the middle of the room, and they drop a bunch of paint on them, or goo or slime or whatever it is, and then glitter, and then flowers, and then stuffed animals, and then of course they get a picture of them, and it's just like, oh, aren't they so cute and everything. And of course the pictures end up getting plastered not only all over the newspaper, but all over, the school as well. And it's extremely embarrassing for the whole team and everything. Mike and Sully the most, but the others don't like it either. And then of course after that, that's when the team is just like, okay, we have to just start working together. We have to use each other's strong points. We have to train for these different trials and everything, and we have to focus on that while also still doing their schoolwork, I'm imagining, because other than that, they would be students then. And what happens is, they all start showing that they have all these different, skill sets, Dawn has he's got tentacles that have the suction cups on them, so he's very good at he can cling to a wall and work his way around the wall. Terry with an I and Terry with a Y, who are the joint ones, are very they're very good at misdirecting and everything. And Scott's very good at actually sneaking up on people because he's very quiet. And there's, you know, it's like, so they all have like these different skills. I don't remember what art skill is, but he has one. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. But during this time frame, what ends up happening is, of course, Mike and Sully, Mike actually is like, okay, here's what we're going to do. They have Scott's mom drive them to Monsters, Inc., and they end up sneaking into the back way. It's like, this is going to get us arrested. Yeah, well, and like they sneak up and then like they're looking down onto one of the scare floors. And as they're watching over the scare floor, they're seeing like all these different, you know, legendary scarers going in and out of the doors, scaring children and everything. And like Mike's like, what do they all have in common? And all of them are just like, nothing. They don't really have much in common at all in regards to, you know, what they use to be scary. And Mike's like, exactly. All of these guys and like, you know, a bunch of these people that we see here being scary that are like these scares that we grew up, you know, watching and learning about and everything, collecting, you know, scare cards and everything of. All of them used what they had at their disposal in order to become these great scarers. You know, they have, you know, if they have claws, they use that when they're scaring. If they have like, you know, fangs, they use that, like all these different techniques that they use. And I really like how they showcase that. And they end up explaining that, or, you know, they end up like taking that as inspiration and using that to like fuel their fire. And in regards to this, they actually all start getting along a whole lot better. Mike and Sully end up getting along a whole lot better, much more prideful in being, you know, members of Uzma Kappa. And, we see that get, you know, everyone's just having a much better time. They're also just having fun with each other as well in regards to not just, oh, we're doing this just to win. It's like, no, we're going to have fun at the same time. And one of the other ones, yeah, there's the toxic one, there's a library one, there's also a one that's called like Don't Scare the Teenager. So it's, you know, a bunch of the different the different sororities and fraternities, the different teams have to like, you know, make their way through this maze and not scare the teenager. So it's just like these like mazes where it's just like a door will pop out and it'll be like, there'll be like a kid on it, or it'll be like an adult or like a teenager or something like that on the door. And like your intention is to, of course, scare the child, not the teenager. And if you scare the teenager, you get trapped. And, you know, so we see one of the other teams get, eliminated there. And, Uzma Kappa is doing better and better. And there's another one that is, what was the other one? There's that one. I know I'm missing one, aren't I? I think I'm missing one of the trials. Cannot remember what the other trial is. But what ends up happening is then it finally comes down to the final scare games, which is between Uzma Kappa and Roar Omega Roar. And, you know, Randall is on, like, the Roar Omega Roar team because he got, like, brought onto that team at some point in time, you know, back when the scare games first started and everything. And we have this moment where Sully was actually talking to Dean Hardscrabble about, like, you know, if we win, there won't be any, you know, hard feelings. She's like, no, there won't be any hard feelings if you win. But the thing is that the last trial, the last one involves, you know, your whole team having to prove themselves. And I know for a fact that at least one member of your team is not scary. And that's Mike. And Sully, you know, he tries to get Mike to be scarier, and it doesn't work the way that, you know, they need it to. And, you know, it ends up being, you know, Sully's like, well, why don't we have Mike go last in regards to, you know, going into the, you know, the scare trial, because the scare trial is like, it's the same thing from like the scare final. It's, you know, the scare room where you go in, scare simulator, and you scare the child, and, you know, you're ranked, you know, it's based on like team overall scores, of course, but it's also, you know, individual scores combined. And what ends up happening is, you know, it's them versus Roar Omega Roar. And, you know, one by one, each of them go in, and, you know, we see how the Roar Omega Roar guys scare, and it's, you know, they're good. But, like, we see all of Mike's team, all of the Uzma Kappa team being much better at, like, how they scare with, you know, seeing, you know, knowing how to scare this particular child, or the best way to do it, you know, using their own techniques and everything. And I love how they show that throughout that scene. You know, Squishy is just like, since he's so easy, so easy for him to sneak up on people. He uses that to his advantage. Don Carlton, uses his suction cups to, avoid the toxic stuff on the floor and, scare down from the ceiling, a bunch of this other stuff. And I love how they show that, to scare the child, to scare the fake child. And Mike goes last, and Sully, got like a really good scare out of the child, and like he, it was like Mike versus Randall, and Mike ended up causing Randall to like fall off the ceiling and like land on the rug and get covered in purple, like pink hearts. So that didn't scare the simulator child very well. And what ends up happening is, of course, that's where like Randall starts getting, much more angry at Sullivan, at Sully. And what ends up happening is it is Mike versus Worthington for like the final match. And like, they're kind of, the teams are almost tied. And, they go in and, John, Worthington, scares the kid and everything. And like, if Mike doesn't get like a perfect score or whatever, then they're not going to win. And Mike goes in and, he uses his tactics of like, claw on the wood and all this other stuff to like creep the child out and everything before he scares him. And he scares him and he gets this big scream out of the simulator. And from there, it's like, oh my god, Uzma Kappa won, and like everybody's just so happy, and well, Mega Roar is not happy, but like everybody else is like super happy and everything, and like congratulatory, like there's confetti and huge celebration that's going on. And, just like, oh my god, like the underdogs won moment. And what ends up happening is, Mike and Sully and everybody, and Uzma Kappa are just so happy and everything. And, what ends up happening is, Sully, they get the trophy and everything. And, after like everybody's like cleared out of the giant stadium that this happened in, Mike goes back in to, kind of just look at the room, because he's just like, he's just like so happy and everything, but he ends up, accidentally like scaring the thing again, and it screams and it gives him a really good score, and he's confused, and he ends up like looking at like the box that is like where the control panel is, and he opens that and he sees that it was tampered with, and that the last one was like set down really, really low. And Sully's just like, no, Mike, come on, let's just leave. And Mike figures out that Sully is the one that like tampered with it, and the rest of the team is there and they witness this, and they're just like, Sully. Like, they're just, like, so, like, they're sad that Sully kind of lied to them, that Sully, like, tricked them and cheated and everything. And Sully goes off, and, I mean, like, Mike's just, like, furious, of course, and he goes, he just kind of goes off, and the rest of the team is just like, we can't accept this. And, like, Sully goes and, like, he tells Dean Hardscrabble that he's just like, I'm sorry, I cheated. I'll leave, don't punish the rest of my team. Just, I'll leave. I won't make a big deal. And, like, I don't remember if she's, like, ready to make that deal with him or not. But, like, she's like, I want you off campus by morning. He's like, of course, and everything. And at that moment, there's, like, an alarm goes off that's like, oh, someone, like, got into, like, the door crafting area. And it's Mike that got into the door crafting area. And he's, gone through the door. And this door that's, newly crafted door into the human world to go and try to scare these children, go and try to scare a child to prove to himself that he is scary. And he goes in, and it ends up being this summer camp. And it's this, like, summer camp cabin full of girls. And he doesn't scare them. He tries and tries, and he just can't scare them. They're just not scared of him, and he ends up, like, running out. And, Dean Hardscrabble's, like, showing up. She's, like, trying, getting the whole area blocked off and everything. It was like, no. He's, there's, like, he's on the other side and everything. We have to leave this closed until, like, the child detection agency shows up and everything, so we can, take care of everything here. And Sully actually has, like, the rest of the team is there as well. The rest of Uzma Kappa is there as well. And, like, they try to distract, like, Dean Hardscrabble, and, like, Sully gets behind them and, like, goes into the door and everything and into the human world. And he ends up running through, and, the people in the human world think that he's a bear because it's happening at night, and they think that he's, like, this bear that's, like, got into the campsite. into the campgrounds. And so they're just like looking all over for him. Like there's like law enforcement showing up and everything, like police and like wildlife handlers showing up to try to stop Mike, or try to stop Sully. And Sully ends up finding Mike like sitting on this lakeshore, where Mike is just like, I tried my whole life. I've tried everything I can think of to try to prove that I can be a scarer. That's all I've ever wanted my entire life, was to be a scarer. And I've worked my butt off for the past, 12, almost 13, 12 and a half, 13, whatever years at this point in time. And I can't, I'm not scary. Everyone's always overlooked me, and I just wanted to prove for once in my life that I could do this, that I could do something that people thought that I couldn't do. And, Sully is, Sully's like, I understand that. And Mike is like, no, you don't understand me. You're a Sullivan. And so Sully's like, yeah, I'm a Sullivan. I'm the Sullivan who failed, who got kicked out of the program. I'm the Sullivan who, didn't show up to class prepared. I'm the Sullivan who, couldn't do anything in regards to scaring. And everything that came from the team, I've been riding on your coattails the entire time that we've been here. You're the one that came up with all those strategies for the team. You're the one that did this. You're the one that showed them how to do this. You're the one that made those, ragamuffins, whatever, that's not the word that he uses, but made those misfits into a team of scarers. You are the reason that happened. You are the reason that we did as well as we did in the games. I am the one that was this failure. I had all this expectation on me, and I was a failure. And, we have this moment, and it's like the two of them by the lake shore, and it's actually one of my favorite moments in the movie. Because it's like, it shows you where there's, it's like they'd be started to become friends already, because they're like, they were doing better at, getting along after, like, they went to the trip to the Monsters, Inc. and everything, and they're just getting better at, understanding each other. And it's just like, this is where you actually see that, yes, they are friends, and they actually say that they are friends at that moment. And at one point, like the humans show back up again, and like they're trying to chase them around, and Mike and Sully end up, Mike's the one that figures out, okay, we have to get back to our world, obviously. And to do that, we need to activate the door. We know that it probably still has to be, connected. And if we can generate enough scream energy on this side of the door, it should force it open on the other side, and then we can get back through. And I love Mike's plan for that, because, on the other side of the door, back in the monster world, Dean Hardscrabble has, like, everybody's, been, left, been, held out of the room where the door is, and, like, they brought down, like, the safety shielding or whatever. So just Dean Hardscrabble in there, where they're waiting for the Child Detection Agency to show up. And she's just, like, waiting there. And on the other side of the door, we have this moment where, like, Sully is just like, but these are adults, Mike. I can't scare adults. And, like, and Mike basically does the whole thing of, like, you can if you follow my plan. And they come up with this great plan of, like, they get the adults into the cabin. And it's like I'm assuming it's like using, like, almost every trick in the book, because they make, like, they do, it's like, it's eerily quiet. Like, they, like, tripped on, like, they trip on, like, I wanted to say a phonograph, but that's not right. Oh God, no, they put on a record player, and, they get that going, and, like, we see the way, that, the rest of the group are just like, or the rest of the adults, these, like, grown adults that are, like, used to, like, probably dealing with, hold on. I apologize if you end up hearing any extra background noise at the moment. My mother just got home, along with, I think, one or two of her cousins. And the dog went down to go and break down. But what we see end up happening is, and the dog's barking. So I apologize if there's background noise for that, but it should be okay for me to still do the video. And what ends up happening is, they're using, like, every trick in the book to scare the adults. Get weird music playing, creepy, scratches keep appearing on the walls. You know, it's dark, so it's, you know, you can't see what's going on. You know, they knock over a bunch of the bunk beds. And what ends up happening is, you know, Mike, like, kind of dashes through them because, like, they're all paying attention to, like, what's going on around them, not below them. That, like, he dashes through them and, like, has, like, this, like, fishing wire that he, like, wraps around, like, their legs. And what ends up happening is, Sully, you know, when it's time, Sully jumps out and, you know, uses, you know, this huge roar that Sully can do, these huge, you know, bear, lion, whatever roars that Sully can do, and, like, just scares the living crap out of these adults. And I'm just like, yeah, no, I'd be in their shoes too. I would be scared out of my mind if that happened to me as well. Yeah. And so yeah. And what ends up happening is, you know, their screams are enough to not just power the door enough to activate it from, like, their side, and, like, you know, so they can, from, you know, activate it so it'll, like, you know, activate on the, you know, monster side so they can go back through. It literally starts splintering the door and then shatters the door along with, like, the containment thing, and, like, all around Hardscrabble, all these, like, this scream energy that's coming out of it is, like, filling up all these empty canisters that are just on the walls. And it's just, like, filling them up and then overfilling them to the point where they're exploding. And, you know, the door explodes open and Mike and Sully come through. Don't know if this means the door got exploded on the human side of the world too. I don't know, but at least got exploded on the monster side of the world. And they, you know, it goes, you know, it blows up. And, you know, Mike and Sully come through and they're just like, we see Dean Hardscrabble just, like, poke her head out from behind, like, where she ended up having to, like, hide when all of this was going on inside of the sealed room. She, like, pokes her head out, and she, like, comes over to them, and she's just like, how did you do that? And it's just like, you know, and Sully just goes, it was all Mike. And it's, you know, she's just like, those were in, like, she's been a scarer long enough. She knows what child scream sounds like. This is adult screams. This is terrified adults that these guys just caused to probably wet their pants. Trained adults that are, like, you know, like, law enforcement and, like, animal, you know, people that are used to dealing with wild animals, probably made them, you know, wet themselves quite a bit. And what ends up happening is, you know, they you know, they do end up getting expelled, and, like, the child detection agency shows up and everything, so we see all the guys in the yellow suits again. And you're like, well, they're being, you know, Mike and Sully are being, you know, kind of carried out and everything because they're, like, you know, being expelled and everything. And, of course, we cut back to, you know, Uzma Kappa the next day where, you know, they're saying goodbye to them. And the rest of Uzma Kappa explains that, oh, well, you see, Hardscrabble accepted us all into the scare program, you know, the rest of the team into the scare program, because of, she was impressed with the way that we performed during the games. And, you know, so it's also, Don Carlton is going to be marrying Squishy's mom, which is just weird. He's also very awkward about it, which is just funny. Bad dad jokes. And, you know, Mike and Sully are leaving. You know, they hug their sorority brothers and everything, and they head out, and they leave campus. And, you know, Mike gets on the bus to go home, and he's just like, for the first time in my life, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And you know, and Sully's like, you know, well, you know, if you ever figure that out, let me know. And while they're, you know, while the bus is driving off, we actually see Sully jump onto the bus and go, Mike! And it's just like, okay, calm down. And, like, you know, Mike goes out and they talk, and he's just like, okay, yeah, no, you're not scary in regards to, like, physically scary. But, you know, Sully is telling Mike, you know, you're not physically scary, but you are the most brilliant mind when it comes to scaring that I have ever met. You're the one that planned everything. And it's like a continuation of, like, you know, the speech that he kind of gave Mike by the lake. And, you know, it's like, and if Dean Hardscrabble can't see that, then I'm what? And she shows up, and she's like, I swear to God, this woman must just, like, fly around campus all day long and figure out ways to, like, scare children. Scare the students. And the teachers, for that matter. And she, like, you know, comes down from, like, you know, she, you know, comes up to them, and she's like, just when I was starting to like the two of you. And she like, they got expelled and everything, as I said. And she's like, you did something that nobody has managed to do for a very long time. You surprised me. Specifically, she's telling Mike that he surprised her, but also Sully to a degree. And, you surprised me, which is saying something. And while I can't admit you back into the school, I will say, she basically says, it's like, well, I can't admit you back into the school. She's kind of like rooting for them to succeed in like whatever endeavor they choose to go after. And of course, then, she leaves, and Mike and Sully end up looking at the paper, and like Mike is like, well, we could always go and, they're always hiring in the mailroom at Monsters Inc., and they end up going and working in the mailroom. And, they're the Abominable Snowman is their manager or whatever. And, they end up, Mike and Sully, over, a couple of years, like, work their way, up through the company. They go from, working in the mailroom to being the janitorial staff to being, like, in the lunchroom to then, being, like, scare canister wranglers or whatever. And then, eventually, they go to the scare auditions, scare tryouts. And, Sully, of course, gets to become a scare and everything. And we see, like, an older, younger picture of Waternoose with an afro, which is just weird. Very weird. And, Sully becomes a scare, and of course Mike is part of his, scaring team and everything. And, we know that at some point in time, like, Randall obviously graduated, and there's, like, other ones that, of course, graduated and ended up going there as well. Coming to work there as well. But, it's, it's now, like, their first day as scarers. And, Mike is finally able to, walk onto the scare floor as a scarer. And, of course, we know that then, down the line, that leads to, of course, everything that happens in Monsters, Inc. and, in the original movie. There is a post-credit scene, which doesn't really have anything to do with Mike or Sully. It's like there's this yellow slug monster student who at the beginning of the movie was, like, very trying to get to class, but he's, like, extremely slow. And, like, by the time he gets there, it's, the class is already finished with. As in, like, the entire school year is finished with, so it doesn't really matter. Although one thing I would like to see, and I have no idea if they did this in Monsters at Work, but it would have been an interesting way to, like, tie, because, of course, the timeline that we would have for Monsters Inc. that it goes Monsters University, then Monsters Inc., then Monsters at Work, because Monsters at Work, the mini-series that they have on Disney Plus, takes place after Monsters Inc., as in literally right after Monsters Inc., because it's showing how they change it from, like, the scaring into the laughing. And so we see that. And I've only seen, like, 2 episodes of this, and I don't think that Dean Hardscrabble shows up at all. But what I would like is, like, if at some point in time, like, if they do, like, a continuation of it, or if they do something else, like, Dean Hardscrabble shows up at, like, and this may have happened and I just don't know. If Dean Hardscrabble shows up at Monsters Inc. and, like, sees the two of them now in charge of Monsters Inc., and she's just like, so you've gone from scaring to laughing. And just, this, how that works and everything, like, seeing the way that she would, like, interact with them would be very interesting, and the fact that now she literally has to change her entire program. Then again, she may have already been retired by then, and it might have been moved on to a different dean of the school, for all I know. Or it's like, she's no longer a scare, she has no more ties to the school, she's just retired, and she, like, is just sitting there reading a newspaper about, like, Waternoose is, blah, 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 Waternoose was, I don't remember, arrested or whatever, like, charged for whatever, and, Mike and Sully are now in charge of, Monsters Incorporated and, all this other stuff, and, like, she's just like, and they're going to move to laugh energy instead of scare energy. Well, I wish the boys luck. At least I don't have to train the new generation of scarers. Just like, she doesn't have to worry about that. But it's just like, whoever the new dean of the School of Monsters University and Fear Tech and whatever else, they just have to redo their whole programs. This is like the ramifications of that down the line. I just find funny. In regards to the cast, of course, we have Billy Crystal, of course, as Michael Mike Wazowski, of course. John Goodman as, James P. Sullivan, Sully. We have Steve Buscemi as Randall. We, of course, have Helen Mirren as Dean Hardscrabble. Dean Hardscrabble was originally supposed to be a male character, but then they're just like, well, let's turn her into a female character instead. And they had all these other cool designs that they wanted to use from. They eventually settled on the dragon bat centipede design that I just love. We have Paul Soon as Scott Squishy Squibbles, who's of course one of the Uzma Kappa guys. We have Joel Murray as Don Carlton, the salesman that is the older student. We have Sean Hayes as Terry with a Y, and then Dave Foley as Terry with a I, or Terry with a Y and Terry with an I. And of course, Sean Hayes I know from Grace because he's just Jack. And of course, Dave Foley was on Will and Grace several times. We have Charlie Day as Art, who is the other fraternity guy. We have Alfred Molina as Professor Knight, who is, of course, the Scaring 101 teacher. We have Nathan Fillion as Jonathan Worthington, who's the president of Roar, Mega Roar. Also, he has a great line in the movie that I do love when they drop the stuffed animals on Mike and Sully and the whole group, the Roar Uzma Kappa, when they're coming into, he's just release the stuffed animals, and the same slide of release the Kraken. I just find that funny. We have Audrey Plaza as Claire Wheeler, who is just she's the president of the Greek Council, so she's one of the ones in charge of running the game. She's very not very reactive to stuff throughout the movie. She's just very hyped at the end when they win. We have John Krasinski as Frank McKay. We have Bonnie Hunt as Karen Graves, who is Mike's preschool teacher. It's not really anything else. John Ratzenberger, of course, comes back to play Yeti, the abominable snow monster, at the very end of the movie, so he's there. Roz, of course, who is, of course, Agent 1 of the CDA, is, of course, just voiced by Bob Peterson, who is, I think, the director of the original Monsters, Inc., if I remember correctly. Not really too many else. No, that's about it. So that's what I have. I do really like Monsters University, and I mean, like Mike and Sully, I am technically a college dropout, although they were expelled as opposed to, fully being dropped out. But, oh well. Yeah, that's what I have. I thank you very much for watching. I cannot remember what would be the next one for, for the next video. Sorry for what the next movie review would be, but, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!
Scariness is the true measure of a monster. If you're not scary, what kind of a monster are you?